Jake, this is not the first podcast we've done together, but it is the last with you as a full-time BarBend employee. And, I'm very thankful for my time working with you, but I'm just going to kick things right off. What is the first thing that being a strength sports journalist taught you about the fitness space?
I think it's the diversity of the sports in the sense that I think every sport has its unique voice and its unique energy to it. And I think that was really cool because I think coming into it from the outside world, if you're not really vested in covering and learning about the athletes who are invested in each sport, you kind of just assume all strength sports kind of bleed the same, right? Like they're all similar. They all involve maximal weights, doing something for time, or being a little bit more fit than your peers. But it's crazy when you finally get into the logistics of everything and start working with some of these athletes on a regular basis and really diving deep into the roots and weeds there, that you learn that everybody has their unique voice. And similar to every other sport, like baseball is different than football and the energy they produce, similar to strength sports. And I think a lot of folks who don't necessarily spend a lot of time in that world overlook that, but there are certainly some big differences between those sports. That was like the first thing I learned.
Which sport had the steepest learning curve for you, where you were like, wow, I'm taking a little while to wrap my head around this? Not that we're ever stopping learning about these sports, right? But which one were you like, this is a lot to take in?
So there's two, I think, for different reasons. I think strongman was tough to take in just because there's such a varied nature of competitions and events that it can be a little bit tedious at times to kind of follow the flow, especially with some of the sporadic coverage that you get from some of like the World's Strongest Man broadcasters, folks like that, the big broadcasters there in that world. It was a little bit tough to like kind of wrap my head around the diversity of how competitions change regularly, and so do events. But then also I think weightlifting, just from like a logistics standpoint and the intricacies of like just attempt selections and so forth, and what's a world record, what's international, what's national, and so forth. And like the differences there, the variances there, and some of the other background stuff that happens in weightlifting make it a little bit more complex to cover, especially when you're just starting. Like it's obviously I knew how like a weightlifting competition went. I knew how it was scored and everything else. But then we had like the changing of the point system and everything else. And that just added some layers of complexity to what would normally seem like a pretty simple sport. You do this lift, you do this lift. Not so much.
What are some events that you covered or were involved in coverage? And your role at BarBend, you've done a lot of things. We're talking about strength sports right now. You've produced and edited a ton of training content. So even separate from the sports, people just looking to get stronger, how can we produce resources for those folks who might not be elite athletes or competitive in strength? We'll talk about that in a second. But are there any events that come to mind, whether they be events you covered in person or remotely, that stick out to you as being particularly challenging from the perspective of a journalist?
Oh, 100%. I think the one that sticks out to me, and this is because I was there firsthand, is always the Arnold Classic. Mm-hmm. Just because there is so much going on. Like I remember the first day I ever went to the Arnold Classic to cover it officially, I was so overwhelmed. But then I learned the second day, and I could say this now because I'm leaving, I got a little tipsy throughout the day and kept the buzz going, and it made everything so much more manageable. I would go watch something and then go write it down, have a beer. Go watch something, go write it down, have a beer. And it made it a lot more manageable. But I think the Arnold was probably the most crazy just because there's so much stuff going on and it's literally impossible to see everything.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, you're trying to like check social, like, okay, who lifted the cage? Okay, who lifted on the platform? Okay, what's going on in strongman right now? And trying to keep all the tabs and trying to relay that either with my own work or with you guys back at the BarBend office and trying to be like, okay, this is happening now. Keep an eye out. I'll do this. That was quite the challenge to do, but I managed.
Are there any events that you look back that you covered, again, either remotely or in person, that surprised you, that shocked you? It could be the result. It could be, an injury, someone pulling out or something like that, where you were just like, I did not see that coming when you were writing up a final report.
I think most the competitions that are always, I think, in that nature for me are like the CrossFit Games. I think those are always like just ebbs and flows of highs and lows throughout the days. And that's always fun to try to keep tabs on and stay consistent with. Has anything ever really truly shocked me? I'm trying to think of big injuries that might have happened while I was really connected in, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Like there are probably a couple instances over the last 4 years, but nothing stands out to me as being like, whoa, like I did not see that one coming.
What are you've gotten to interview on the podcast. You've been a host on the podcast numerous times. You've interviewed people for articles, for videos. You've gotten to travel with some really cool athletes, coaches, people in strength. Is there anyone that you got to work with in a capacity at BarBend that where there was a moment where you're like, oh my goodness, like I'm working with this person. Like I never thought I'd have the opportunity to work with this person this closely.
Yeah, I think honestly, I think every big named athlete and coach that I've worked with, I always have those moments. And I think as you do more of them in your career, they kind of like start to fade a little bit, I want to say. But I think a couple that stand out to me significantly are like when I podcast Eric Helms, like he's somebody I've looked up to for so long in the industry. So like being able to podcast with him, people like Dr. Andy Galpin too, like those guys are just like incredibly brilliant, and to have like a full on hour to just have a conversation with them and know that that conversation is not just being had, it's actually like having a purpose and intent behind it. I think that's one of the cool moments when like after and before I'm like nervous before, and then after I'm like, holy crap, like I just produced a piece of content that will hopefully help everyone else along with myself. And it was like super incredibly awesome to work with those guys.
What have you learned about yourself as a writer over the course of your, and it's not to say you didn't do any writing in the fitness community before you came to BarBend. You already had a pretty impressive writing resume, but what have you learned about yourself as a writer over the course of your 4 years here?
First off, that I think saying I had an impressive resume beforehand was a little misleading. I was the one who had to look at your resume, so I'm remembering it fondly. So give me credit. Okay, that's true. No, that's true. That's true. I think one thing I've learned is to accept, and this is kind of like a personal thing, that like I am not by any means the best writer. I am never going to like write a beautiful novel. That is not what I'm good at. But I think what I've learned over the last 4 years that I can do really well is to take a little bit more of like let's call them complex or complicated subjects and kind of like synthesize them into like a more digestible manner. And like I could obviously be off the mark here, but I think I have a decent idea of how to do that pretty dang well. And I've just kind of learned that over like the engagement certain articles have gotten, feedback I've gotten on certain articles, and just the reinforcing of like, hey, this really didn't make sense to me, but thank you for saying it this way. Like this kind of helps me for, I don't want to say dumbing it down because I think that puts it in a negative light, but simplifying it to an extent that is digestible for every person. Because I think at BarBend, we have such a diverse audience that I've learned how to just try to write for everybody in an article. Like it's tough because the people who do follow some of the like research heavy folks, like it's hard to write for them and a true beginner at the same time. Like it's nearly impossible to do on a topic. So to be able to try to learn how to mold those two and create that bridge, I think has been like one of the biggest learning points I've had with my writing over the last 4 years. And just being able to do it now in like a timely manner versus taking like a couple of days to write an article, but like being able to turn something out in a few hours and still have it not lose quality. that I feel like should be stated, that time doesn't always equate to quality there with writing.
In one of your first interviews for the job at BarBend, a skill set that you mentioned you were really interested in developing was that of being an editor, something you hadn't done a lot of. And like I think back to literally almost 4 years ago, you saying, I want the opportunity to edit more. You've gotten the opportunity. You've done a lot of editing at BarBend. You started as a staff writer, and you've been the training editor for a number of years now. What have you learned about yourself as an editor?
I think I've learned, and I think an editor always kind of goes through this, it's to not overextend into someone else's work and trying to like muffle their voice. Not that that was ever an issue for me, but I think at times when you're editing for so many different topics with so many different skill levels of writers, it can be a little bit tough to try to create like a centralized means of how you always edit. And so I've learned to adapt to how a writer's voice is, but then like kind of contextually edit for them. Like some writers I know write great content for us that I work with, but they know that they're not the strongest writers. So they actually appreciate when I do more edits. But then on other writers who are a little bit more advanced, let's call it, in the skill of writing, I know to not touch it as much. So being an editor and like learning to write and work with so many different skill levels, I've learned to understand when to put the gas pedal on and when to like make more edits versus like kind of leaning off and be like, okay, this is your voice. You can keep this. I understand what you mean here, but let's just do like this tiny little tweak versus like this all needs to change. Can we rewrite this and so forth? I think that's been the biggest skill of editing just for so many different people, especially on so many different topics. It's always like a contextual thing. And I think without taking every writer's voice and subject into context, you kind of lose a little bit of the quality that could be there with the writing.
I do need an important question that I know all of your followers on social and all of your fans are asking. And now that you're on your way out, you're no longer going to be a full-time, you're no longer going to be our full-time training editor. I can get your honest take on this. Sumo deadlifts. Is it cheating? Is it cheating, bro? Come on.
It depends if I'm in competition using it to pull a PR. If I'm not, then yeah, it's totally cheating. No, I'm kidding. No, I don't think no, of course not. Like, I know you're just trying to tee me up and fire me up right now, but I'm not going to take the bait. No, sumo is not cheating. Do I think they should be scored differently? I think that's a bigger conversation that should be had on deeper levels, like on weight classes and federations and so forth. But let's not even dive into that. But no, I don't think it's cheating at the end of the day.
What do you think has changed the most or most perceptibly in your mind about the world of strength training in the past 4 years? Not necessarily strength sports.
As the industry continues to evolve and more knowledgeable coaches are starting to come up to the surface that might not have had that reach before because they're not as marketable, people are finally starting to be like, well, hold on. Is that actually the case, or should we investigate this deeper and ask bigger questions? And I think over the last 4 years, that's been something that maybe it's just like a personal thing I'm going through, but I'm definitely noticing more of a shift into more of like an understanding mindset of being multiple ways to approach a topic versus, oh, like this website is big and they're like called the authority, so I'm just going to take everything they say for what it is, and that is fact. And we're finally moving away from that, I think, in the sense of even intermediate lifters are starting to be like, well, I don't know if that's true because I've now seen these 3 opinions and I'm synthesizing that to conclude with my own opinion. And I don't know if that's correct or that's correct. So I'm going to keep asking more questions and investigating and learning. And it's really cool because I think we're seeing now a blend of like the pendulum, right? So it goes from like, there was a pendulum of the bro science, and then we went so research heavy. Mm-hmm. And now we're coming right back into the middle where I think more and more people are able to blend that and synthesize it. So it's like, obviously research is not real life in a lot of settings. A lot of populations are not who you and I are, but at the same time, what they're investigating can be applicable to what we're doing. So now how do we contextualize what the research is saying here versus what we're experiencing in real life, and then blend those two to make smarter decisions? And I think that as a whole is where the strength industry is starting to head more and more to. And it's like almost like content and coaches and everything are continuing they're like leveling up. That's what I wrote a post the other day about, like, there's no more low bar to entry in the fitness world. You cannot just have a certification and come in and be a knowledgeable source, because you have to continually evolve and stay up to date with everything that's changing from both like the coaching standpoint, the research standpoint, and the blending those two together. That the industry as a whole, to sum all of this up, because I'm just kind of rambling at this point, I think is heading in a direction that is being a lot better at synthesizing multiple sources and then asking better questions to find answers that are actually applicable to one's individual's life.
That gets me pumped. And I think these are the sorts of conversations and the sort of energy that, not to get too sappy here at the end, Jake, but I'm going to miss that energy every day. I think coming in and seeing your passion for everything from the macro topics in strength and strength training to the minutia of, squat mechanics based on individual biometrics. It all gets you excited. And I think it's an infectious energy, something that has really shaped our brand, has shaped how I approach my job day to day, and something that I know you're going to carry through your career in fitness and strength. And so I'm really excited to see where that takes you, and also really thankful because I think that your voice is one that the communities online and that the industry in general will really benefit from. So on behalf of BarBend, which I get to say, thank you so much for an amazing almost 4 years. Let's round up, call it 4 years. And best of luck on your next ventures, Jake.
Well, thank you so much. And like, honestly, to shadow that, like, I could not be more grateful for the opportunity of BarBend. I think over the last 4 years, I've definitely have lived out some of the dreams that I've always had. Like, I know a lot of people don't know the background here, but like one of my dreams growing up was to be a fitness editor in New York City. So to be able to do that for 4 years and meet the athletes and coaches I have, and to be able to really invest energy into learning how to write, build like coaching mindset, and like build a site from, I like obviously not nothing, but from a lower traffic to where we're at now. Yeah. It's been such a whirlwind experience, and I am always grateful that you and I stumbled upon each other that photo shoot, like in what was it, like September 2016? Like, that was so long ago.
It's a small industry. That's one reason. That's one thing I will say to anyone in the fitness space. Don't burn bridges, because you end up working with the same people and crossing paths again, because the community, it seems real big, but it's actually pretty small. And what you really want to do is just keep your network full of really smart, really passionate people who honestly have the industry in mind and who want to just do good things for people who are looking to get stronger. And Jake Boly, you're the prime example of that. And I'm fortunate to know you. So thanks so much for joining us. And this has been a very special recording of the BarBend podcast, a very bittersweet one, but just another thing I'm very thankful for. Appreciate it, Jake.
Thank you. And to everybody who's ever read anything or listened to anything I've done with BarBend, thank you as always. I really appreciate it, and for your time and energy. And if you've ever reached out, appreciate you for that too. But thank you so much, David. Thank you for having me.